welcome our new panelists as well. So first of all, I want to thank Erwin, I want to thank Alison, and to you, Siphamandla, for putting together really some excellent data. I think you've set the scene both in the residential market here in South Africa and also, more importantly, in the affordable sector and what's happening at the bottom end there. So I think first of all, I'd like to introduce our first two new panelists. And there are two new experts which I'd like to join our panel. So they'll be joining Erwin, they'll be joining Alison and also Siphamandla. And our next guest is a qualified chartered accountant. In 1989, he joined forces with his father, John, a civil engineer by profession, to establish the AMDE Group. As CEO of the AMDE Group, he focuses mostly on overall strategic planning and team leadership. And in its 30 years of operation, the group has established its reputation as South Africa's leading developer of new urban lifestyles. AMDE is highly regarded within the industry and recognized as one of South Africa's largest and most influential real estate developers. So this reputation has been built upon multiple successful real estate developments and investments, and I'll run through a few of them. The iconic and award-winning Melrose Arch mixed-use precinct in Johannesburg, widely recognized as South Africa's best example of new urbanism. Then, of course, Harbour Arch, currently under construction in the Cape Town CBD, and this six-tower development has been referred to as the most significant development in the Cape Town CBD in recent years. Then we've got the Yacht Club located in Cape Town's Rockabye Canal precinct at the gateway to the V&A waterfront. And this mixed-use precinct is home to luxury residential apartments, premium grade offices, and Africa's first AC hotel by Marriott. And of course, he's been into affordable housing precincts, Golden Grove Estate located in Ottery, Cape Town. It will provide homes for 1,000 families from previously disadvantaged communities. And 120 End Street is a mixed-use precinct in Doornfontein, Johannesburg. And this precinct provides affordable homes for 1,500 families, along with convenience, retail, a school book and toy library, as well as sports and recreation facilities. There's also retirement villages with Evergreen Lifestyle, South Africa's leading lifestyle retirement brand. And the portfolio comprises 7 existing villages, 6 in Cape Town, 1 in Johannesburg, with a further 6 planned for the Western Cape. And of course, then there's lifestyle estates. So it's been right across the board. Valdevie, internationally award-winning Polo and Equestrian Estate, Pearl Valley, a residential estate surrounding the Jack Nicklaus signature golf course in Franschhoek Valley, Satari Country Estate, 192-hectare residential estate located outside Somerset West in the Western Cape, and Westbrook, a new suburb in Port Elizabeth, Eastern Cape. And the completed development will incorporate 3,000 residential homes, a Currow School, and Evergreen Retirement Village, retail center, and office space, all set within a lush 128-hectare parkland. And of course, they had a recent foray into the UK and the US, and they've got 2 new developments in the UK cities of London and Norwich. And in the USA, they are busy with 8 new developments spread across the US states of Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. His name is James Wilson. He's the co-founder and he's the CEO of the AMDE Group, a proudly South African company. They remain invested and are really optimistic about the future of South Africa, and he seeks to play a part in securing a better life for all. Well, first of all, welcome to you and thank you for joining us on the panel, James.
Thank you, Neale. It's quite an introduction. Thanks very much.
Absolute pleasure. And then, of course, last but not least, I want to introduce our other new panelist as well. She is a director and head architect at Bitprop. And Bitprop is a social enterprise that seeks to address housing shortages by using a unique funding model to allow private investors to invest in backyard micro rental units. Property owners gradually use this upfront investment to earn a supplementary income, and the idea of micro development at a macro scale guides the work of the startup, and she says it will soon transform the real estate sector from below, and I can certainly believe that. She pursues her passion projects where she uses research, action research, and co-production to support localized development of neighborhoods and community infrastructure. She's also a keen skater reader, and the human of 2 dogs and a cat. Her name is Claire de Trevou. She's director and the head architect of Bitprop. Welcome to the panel, Claire.
Thanks for having me.
An absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Okay, so what I'm going to do, James, we had 3 very interesting presentations this morning. And James, I'm going to bring you in here first of all. And we sort of set the scene for the residential property market and the affordable sector and all the trends. And a lot of interesting data came out. But James, you're also operating in that sector. And clearly there is a need for more affordable type projects. So maybe you can tell us, as a significant developer here in South Africa, how can we create more affordable projects here in South Africa?
Thanks, Neale. Yeah, we're proud that we've ventured into more affordable housing. As you're aware, we did something 10 years ago, 1,500 homes in Doornfontein in Johannesburg. And we've just recently got approval for 1,000 properties in Ottery, Golden Grove in Ottery. So yeah, we're delighted that our company's focused again on affordable housing. I think the simple fact is there's such a massive discrepancy between demand and supply that I think all reasonable property developers need to really start looking at how we can get involved. We've got all the skills and all the expertise, and I think it's an exciting opportunity for big developers like ourselves to participate in affordable housing, and we're absolutely focused on getting things developed and starting to supply that market.
Well, what we found out from a lot of the other presentations earlier on, James, is that we need the government's assistance in this process. Would you agree with that kind of thinking?
Absolutely, I do agree, and the other panelists are probably better placed than I am to put pressure on the government, and they've been involved a lot longer than I have in affordable housing, so they probably have a better sense of where we have to apply the pressure and how we can get government to be involved. But absolutely correct, we have to get government involved, but I don't think that we should ignore the fact that there are opportunities nonetheless that we can get on with immediately to try and start supplying the market whilst we continue to engage with government.
Right. Okay, Claire, so I want to bring you in here because you've got a slightly different model there. How do you think that your model, the Bitprop model, can address the economic and housing crisis post-COVID-19?
So just to give a little bit of background around the Bitprop model, just for anyone who's a little bit unfamiliar, what we do is we are a micro development company. So we partner with low income households, typically in sort of township neighborhoods. And we partner with the homeowner. We design, build, and manage rental units for them. And we pay for the capital for that investment into their property to be made. And then over a 10-year period, we have an innovative rental sharing agreement with the homeowner. So the homeowner starts making an additional income from day one. And over that 10-year period, we make back our capital investment plus some administration fees and a small amount of return. I think what's really important is often we look at the housing spectrum and we forget how important the supply of rental at the end of the spectrum really is. And if we can, so we're really focusing on how we continue to increase the supply of rental, which allows younger so what we're really seeing is this upsurge in this emerging middle class, for want of a better term, where, it's young adults, 20 to 35, who are moving into our units who are earning between, 7.5 and sometimes close to 20,000, who don't necessarily want to even buy or can't afford to buy. They're more of a transient population, and that's really where we're focusing on. And I think that by really kind of stimulating that end of the market, but also coming in with not only affordable quality product, but a product that is well designed and caters to working from home needs, we're able to offer people who would have maybe been in the lower end of the market an alternative to purchasing.
Yeah, so it's more of a kind of an investment opportunity for those people that actually own title in the townships. I've been fortunate; I've been exposed to it, so I've seen what it's done, and it's obviously certainly uplifts the community, and I think it's a very interesting model, and it's probably something that James would like to get involved with at some other stage going forward, because I think it really uplifts the community. Okay, so I'm getting to Erwin. So Erwin, I mean, when you finished your presentation, it was quite difficult, because there's a question here from one of the panelists, and they're asking you about, should I invest now, and and all that kind of stuff, or where are we in the property cycle, and is it time to buy property? And I think maybe they're asking the wrong person, because you set the scene in terms of your presentation. You were very clear cut. But I think maybe I'd like to just bring in the what's actually happened sort of post-lockdown. We've seen there's been quite a lot of pent-up demand, and clearly it's been. I would have loved to seen Alison's data, sort of for 2020, that we could have actually done a closer analysis of what was actually happening there. But what do you think is happening there? Because the data doesn't point to major optimism going forward in terms of how you do that. So maybe just answer the question: where are we in the property cycle? Is it time to buy property in the context of this pent up demand that's also happened?
Well, I'm not pent up demand. One must differentiate between effective demand and notional demand. Notional demand is what government says. We've got 2 million shortage of houses, whereas, of course, actual demand or effective demand is demand that which is affordable and payable by somebody. That's effective demand. So when the economy starts going south, the effective demand actually goes down, and this is what we're seeing happening right now, and will be happening. The blip we've seen since the end of lockdown, I think you can ascribe it to two things. First of all, yes, this is the very aggressive drop in interest rates. And secondly, we must remember that I suspect many of these sales were done before lockdown, and then during lockdown, the deeds office didn't work. So you had this deluge of new sales coming through, but we must remember that's still below inflation rate, the growth rates we've seen, and I'm confident that when the economy starts biting, or the lack of growth in the economy starts biting seriously next year, that prices will go down further in real terms. In fact, in nominal terms, they may even decline. And as we saw, it's going to affect the upper end of the market more than the lower end for the time being. But I'm worried about the lower end because the government hasn't started culling jobs. I understand Eskom is sort of doing attrition on the employees, which is not dramatic. But the government, in order to salvage what is left of the economy, fiscally speaking, will have to, if not, well, at least go the attrition way, if not actually cut salaries, laying off and cutting salaries. If we don't do it, then of course we're just kicking the bucket down the can down the street instead of picking it up. So for that reason, to me, it's quite clear that the next few years, next many years, is not going to be a good investment of property. The big question is, isn't there elsewhere better investments, like, for instance, investing in equity and so on? I can't answer that question because everything is relative. But certainly, just looking at the prospects for capital growth, I wouldn't go into property, generally speaking, right now.
Okay. Just remember, Erwin, this is a property conference. We pro property in this side over here. You're telling people to go into equities. Okay, Siphamandla.
No, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. I said, if you don't invest, if you've got money to spare, the question is where to invest. It's a big problem. It's becoming a worldwide problem.
Yeah. No. Okay. So, point made. So, Siphamandla, I saw you were putting up your hand furiously there. And I know you wanted to probably respond. And I also encourage the rest of the panelists, you don't have to agree with each other. It's not about agreeing. And I think if you've got a vehement debate, James, you can jump in too. But Siphamandla, maybe you, and also you, Alison, as well. So, Siphamandla,
hi, can you hear me? First round of disagreement. Yes. So I just wanted to address. I just wanted to address the issue of demand that we are seeing right now. So from our perspective, just looking at the industry-wide data, I mentioned in the presentation that year to September this year, volume of new mortgage applications year to date, year to September, 9% above 2019 levels, way ahead of historical levels. I think the last time we saw something like this was back in 2007 during that property market boom. I was still at school, so I wouldn't know you guys were there. I also mentioned that approvals, yes, still lag a bit behind, but even with that, year to date, 1.5% above 2019 levels year to date, year to September. So in our assessment, it's driven by two things. Number one, so for us, it's more than just the closure of the deeds office, right? You need a month, you need 1 or 2 months to clear that up. We are like 4 or 5 months post the closure of the deeds office. So we think that this is, well, in inverted commas, new demand over and above the pent-up demand due to the closure of the deeds office. That's the first one. The second thing that in our assessment, it's really just competition dynamics between home buying and rental, right? So the kind of demand we are seeing in the home buying market is actually diverted away from rental. So the rental market at the moment is being outcompeted by the home buying market because it's much cheaper now in price terms, interest rate terms. You can find bargains out there. There are certain suburbs, particularly those that are termed affluent suburbs. So young buyers are taking advantage of those bargains, and that's what is driving demand right now. So it's both. Yes, part of it is due to the closure of the deeds office for that 1 month or so. But in our view, we've gone past that now. Data now suggests that we are seeing new demand in inverted commas in the home buying environment. But it's mainly just a diversion from rental to home owning.
Okay, Alison, I see you wanted to add to that. Also, I mean, do you have any idea? I mean, you had really good data there up until 2019, and the trends are quite consistent over the years. Any idea in terms of, are those trends, do you think they would be consistent for 2020? I mean, is there any sort of notion that you have? I mean, any thoughts around that? But maybe also you want to add to this conversation as well.
Sure, I wanted to go back a little bit. I was interested in, we've done a little bit of, and we're familiar with BidProp and the work they're doing. And we've also, as CAF, done some work around micro developers in township markets. And we've seen that that's quite a growing area. And I was interested in Erwin's presentation. There was a slide where you were asking about the potential reasons why rentals are declining. And my question is a little bit to Claire, I guess. Sorry to put you on the spot, Claire. But my sense from our research and analysis is that that's actually not true in the context of township markets, that's actually quite a growing area. And that at the lower end that you described, Claire, that BidProps caters to, along with other companies such as iBuild and such, that's really a growing area of people, homeowners investing in 2 or 3 units, backyard units, and renting them out, and that there's a real market for that. I'm also interested, Claire, you mentioned working from home and the importance of creating well-designed quality structures for these rental units. And I'm interested in your sense of the target market that you've been working with in terms of tenants. Are the tenants largely people who are white collar who would be working from home? Or are they largely employees of companies that they would be going for retail or hospitality industry and need to commute into work? Because it says a lot about the kinds of specs for the type of rental units that would be needed in township areas and that could be growing. So I think it's really interesting to see. I can understand the rental decline in the higher end, but you asked about the impact of COVID, and I don't think we're going to see a decline at the lower end around rental.
Okay.
But Claire, I'm really interested in your perspective.
Yeah, so Claire, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so just to sort of address those two questions, during COVID, we, our CFO also sits on the board of another big property management company, and they sort of manage properties anywhere between 8 and 25,000, and they were reporting rental prices per month, and they were reporting 50% non-payments, and we're sitting at but during the worst of lockdown, I think we were at like 2% non-payments, and that was because some of our tenants were one of our tenants was a waiter at Willoughby's, and so he obviously lost his income during the hard lockdown, and I can't remember the exact circumstance of the other tenant. But what we have really seen is a consistency, like a consistent ability to pay from most of our tenants, and those that suspect that they won't be able to pay give the correct amount of notice and then move out in time, and we're able to fill those units almost immediately. Because there isn't a lot of data around sort of the trends in this market, we're not entirely sure how many people from maybe like a previously higher rental sort of bracket are moving down into our market because of COVID and pay cuts and stuff like that. But we're seeing mostly in our units, it's about a 50-50 split between individuals and young working couples. And we did at the end of every year, so we're going to go into it now, and I think it's going to be really fascinating post-COVID, but at the end of last year, we did a post-occupancy survey to understand like if the spaces were fine, what people enjoyed about these type of rental units, what our tenants were employed. And most of them were sort of teachers, nurses, police people, all working in like call centers, a lot of call center workers actually. And so with COVID, a lot of companies were able to set up their employees to be able to work from home. So I would say at the moment, probably only 25% of our tenants work from home. But we are sort of seeing this kind of in a lot of the requests we get for spaces, we are seeing a lot of requests around, is there uncapped Wi-Fi? What's the Wi-Fi speeds like? What's the connectivity like in that area? Which is starting to indicate to us that, more and more people are spending more time at home and possibly need the internet to rely on for their work. But I think because we're affordable, but we're still sort of like in the upper middle of the affordable spectrum. So we're still asking 3,500 Rand for a month for rent. But I do sort of see in the next year, especially in the next 6 months, if there's a second wave, there'll probably be an uptick in our tenants working from home.
Okay, excellent. James, I want to bring you in because what are your experiences? You're fairly new into the affordable space. What are you seeing? What's happening in that sector from your side?
Well, if we move just for a moment on what your panelists have just said in the last, particularly Claire, what's really exciting about the South African property market is all the innovation that we can bring to the market. So personally, having been in the industry for 30 years, I find it extremely exciting to see these backyard developments taking place, micro apartments going up, Baldwin have recently announced a fantastic new scheme. Steve Brooks, a fantastic new scheme in Santon with much smaller units. We're doing the same thing. So I think, to try and put a bit of optimism into the debate. I mean, Erwin's correct with all of his economic predictions, but to try and be slightly more optimistic about the future of South African property. There's a lot of exciting things on the horizon, and it's going to be based around new innovation and new ideas. So, we need to get people out of informal shacks. We need to get them onto the first step on the housing ladder, and we need to think differently. So it's not going to be a 40 square meter RDP house situated 40 kilometers outside of a city where the commuters have to spend 40% of their income getting in and out of town. It's going to be people like Claire coming up with great innovative ideas. I'm not sure how big your units are, Claire, but I imagine they're micro apartments, maybe they're 10 square meters or 15 square meters. It just creates great opportunities for young people in their 20s and early 30s to perhaps get onto the housing ladder, albeit in a rental format. Things like free Wi-Fi and sustainable elements, solar panels on roofs, which make electricity costs lower. So I think you're going to see a massive new sector coming into the South African housing market. And I think it's extremely exciting. And we intend to participate in that part of the sector. So I think you'll see micro apartments and backyard developments becoming a very big part of the South African affordable housing market over the next 10 years or so.
Okay, thanks for that, James. There's a question, and I want to deal, because there's quite a few questions flying in over here, and some not all related to affordable, but I got one for you, Erwin. And it says, when one looks at the listed resi property, REITs, and we're talking about REITs within that sector, probably we're talking about the Baldwins of this world, the implied cap rates are very much reflective of the rest of the listed property market, while the fundamentals appear better. I'm interested if you have a view or comments on listed resi in the context of the South African property market. Do you think the yields are indicating higher risk, or just that the REITs are behaving like equities rather than property? Quite a complex question there. Erwin, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I'll try my best. Look, this is the strange thing about South Africa, that the REITs haven't gone full out for residential, as opposed to what happens inside the USA, where REITs investing in residential, in flats is very common. Or more common than in South Africa. The problem, as I see it, has been that you see, residential is typically owner-occupied in South Africa, as opposed to, as I mentioned, maybe Switzerland or Germany, which means that the investors or the buyers of residential properties in South Africa don't really look at the income yield. They look at, well, comparable properties before they buy, but they ignore the income yield. So investors don't dominate the residential property market. And that explains then the very low in yields when you actually calculate the yield. In recent years, there has been a move towards REITs buying up and converting and renovating large blocks, but that's mostly been in the CBDs. It's older blocks, older properties, because they yield higher initial yields. What we haven't been able to do is to actually build new residential for listed counters. And as I said, I suspect the reason for that is that the yields are simply too low. Now, we all know that the moment you list a property, then the yields become much more volatile than directly held property. And we also know that listed residential properties yields are slightly higher than, say, office properties or industrial properties. And the question is, why are these yields higher? And my explanation is, A, we're talking here about older stock with a higher risk, being typically in inner cities. So, and that to me is the explanation for the higher initial yields that you get when you invest in either directly or indirectly through a REIT in residential properties. I'm not sure whether this answers the question.
Yeah, look, I think it's probably as best as possible. It's quite a complex one, and it's quite a I think you have partly answered that. I mean, unless the question the attendee wants to respond back. But let's get to Alison. Alison, and in fact, probably we'll have to bring in Claire here. It's a very interesting one, and the reason why I picked you out, Alison, here from an anonymous attendee. The question is, how can private investors get involved in resale entry-level market? Now, you brought it up quite interesting. It was a very interesting slide. That's quite a big sector of the affordable market. How do we get into that first? Because there's some people that not, they don't have anything to resale and to sort of kick in. So what is the risk and reward ratio? And I think maybe, Claire, there's a possibility you could even be the solution. I don't know. I'm throwing it over to you, Alison.
I think one of the risks that we've encountered at the very low end of the market is costs related to the transaction, and that's not just financial costs but time. So we have a project in Makaza in Cape Town that's trying to support buyers and sellers to transact formally as opposed to informally. And when we get to the very low end of the market, there's a high level of informal transactions. And part of that has to do, and the first thing to say, has to do with RDP properties where the title deed has not been issued. It's impossible to do a formal transaction in that case. But not all of them are that situation. In a number of cases, the title deed exists, but perhaps has not been rectified in terms of a deceased estate. It's not been transferred into the right name. Or there are other issues that need to be related, sorted out in terms of the paperwork, rates clearance certificates, or building approvals and these kinds of things. And that's even before we get to the housing finance and the application for a FLISP. So what we've tried to do is to support households to go through those processes, to negotiate with the deeds office, to deal with the interactions with the city, so that they can go ahead and do a formal transaction. So I think there's costs both to the households, and then of course, if you're looking at investment in the market, there's very few estate agents that work in these areas. Although the Property Practitioners Bill is trying to support the movement of more estate agents into these markets, particularly Black estate agents, because there is a lot of opportunity, but there's been a lack of willingness or a tentativeness by a number of formal estate agents to expand in that area and to think about what that would require and how to do it in a way that is profitable. I think it's certainly possible, but I think when you certainly get to the low end of the market, these transaction hurdles are a lot of what creates an obstacle to a formal transaction. And then what we have is an informal one, which has a number of drawbacks, both for the buyer and the seller. In an informal transaction, you're obviously not going to have a mortgage that's backing it up. So the sale price will typically be lower. And you can't access a FLISP to support the sales price. And of course, for the buyer, there's no protection around tenure with an informal transaction. From the perspective of the municipality, it's also really important, because if there's an informal transaction and the title deed is not formalized and rectified, then there isn't a relationship with the city. And without a formal relationship between the resident or owner and the city, there can't be rates revenue, and there can't be the access to services in the same way, and the back and forth. So I think that's one of the comments around the risks of going down market in the resale market. But it's doable, but we need to think about how to support the market, not so much with subsidies, but with processes. And that's processes, improved efficiencies from the municipality, as well as institutions outside of the municipality.
So before I bring you in, Claire, Alison, in those stats, I'm sure you're aware of the Kaya Land Project from the Free Market Foundation, where they get titles which are sponsored, particularly in township markets. In fact, that's how BitProp actually came about. Claire, I'm actually putting it up front. One of the investors, bought title, in fact, invested in title, donated funds to get title to, and I know KLM have done over 10,000 transactions in various areas around the country. Would those stats be maybe included in your figures where you've got government subsidized figures? Or would you know, or won't you know?
Yes, I mean, if the title deed has been issued, then it will show up in our figures. The problem is the backlog. And of course, there's a government program to address the housing backlog, but that specific grant that was created only applies to properties that were pre-2014, and that grant comes to a close this year. It will, from next year's budget, will be subsumed back into the Human Settlements Development Grant, the HSDG. That grant has not performed in any way, shape, or form that we wanted it to, for a number of reasons. And I think if you asked government representatives, they would say that the issue is about the upstream early steps in the process. So it's the township establishment and other steps that were not taken at the time in our rush to deliver houses and get the keys handed over to the beneficiaries. And going back now 10 years, 20 years, and sorting that out, the master plans and the township establishment is incredibly difficult. And of course, you can understand as well that in the process of 20 years, often the houses have changed hands. So now we're trying to regularize the title deeds, but the original beneficiary is no longer living in the house. And so we've got to figure out an equitable, fair process for determining who has claim to the house now. And it's an incredibly difficult process.
Okay, so I want to bring in Claire. Claire, so do you want to just add on to that in terms of how people can get involved in your investments here?
Yeah, so I think I have a number of points that I've also made here, but just to quickly touch on Alison's point around the title deeds and the title deed issue, we're also seeing it as, I mean, it's a massive roadblock towards developing backyard rental units, because you need to have the title deed in your name so that you're able to process building plans or apply for building plans approval. So we are also trying to work on alternative solutions to that. So, like really kind of trying to push the boundaries in terms of like, what is temporary? Can we build something that is permanent and feels permanent to a tenant, but in the eyes of the law is actually temporary? And so you don't need, you can navigate those kind of tenure issues. And then also kind of in parallel to what the Transaction Support Center is doing, this idea of, what does a blockchain title deed look like, or what does a community validated title deed look like? So like what Alison's saying, if the property has changed hands 4 or 5 times, or in one of the cases of our homeowners, the property is in the deceased grandmother's name, but her only child is also deceased, and now there's 4 grandchildren, and it's just almost impossible to have that title, easily transferred into one of the grandchildren's names. And in that case, everybody in the neighborhood knows that Dolly is in fact the de facto owner of that property. And so what we're investigating is how we can sort of establish, like a community verified form of ownership that measures the level of risk. So it wouldn't necessarily be an alternative to the title deed system, but it would allow an investor to look at a property and say, is that a risky property? Is that not, like, is someone else going to come and try and claim that property? In terms of investing, what we are sort of trying to do at the moment is we're trying to build a fund, the Micro Property Development Fund. So essentially, we have the fund, and then anyone can invest, well, professional investors, so it's a minimum of 100,000 Rand, can invest into the BidProp fund. And then the BidProp fund then invests into the development, so the risk is also then sort of more evenly spread, so you're not directly investing into one property. You have to invest for a minimum of, I think it's 5 years, it's 3 to 5 years, and we're sort of projecting a benchmark return of between 10 and 12% on your investment after the period. So it's impact investing because it is perceived as quite a high risk market, but we're also trying to investigate ways similar to Easy Properties, which is an online sort of platform where you can quite easily invest almost into, you know, like a portion of a property. We're trying to partner with platforms like that that would allow us to allow even smaller investors to easily be able to invest into backyard development. But yeah, for now, you know, it's in terms of investing into BidProp, it's, I mean, it's quite a solid investment. For the we've survived the first 2 years of a startup. We've survived COVID. Like, we're still here. So.
Fantastic. But that's why I want to bring in Siphamandla. Siphamandla, not so quiet there in the corner, because there's a great question here. And it's got to do with FNB. Would FNB and other banks support backyard rental, second dwelling unit developments in high value property market areas? Do you want to answer that? And I know Claire's got probably some experience firsthand in BidProp, but yeah, what is the bank's thoughts around that?
Look, as far as I know, FNB has shown that they are open to such investments. We have tried in a number of times. One of the things we've tried as well to try and understand that market a bit better, and I presented some of those findings through our FNB estate agent survey that specifically focuses on that market. So yes, we are looking into ways in which we can play into that market. I am happy to bring in some of my colleagues who are who focus on those things. Mkhwanazi is one of them. I'm sure, Alison, you would have interacted with him a number of times. So yes, we are playing ball.
Okay, great. Okay, so I want to bring in James here, because James has a specific question for you, and it's related to one of the markets. I know you've got Westbrook in Port Elizabeth, and there's a comment here and a question. What we're finding in Port Elizabeth is that there are, say, 400 units sold per month on average, with 3 months no sales during shutdown. I mean, I think he means lockdown. These buyers, sellers want to move on, so there is now a strong buying period, and we are short of stock between 700,000 and 1.5 million. Don't know how long this will last. So I don't know, it's a bit of a generalization. Comment your thoughts around that?
We're seeing good demand in those price ranges between the 750 and 1.5 price range. Not just in PE, we're seeing it countrywide, but certainly in our project in Port Elizabeth, we're doing very good sales. And I agree with the comments made by your listener. So absolutely taking place in PE.
Okay, great. So, to James, for you, you've just entered this affordable market. Where do you think the next phase is? I mean, without giving away your secret sauce and what have you, there's surely got to be an opportunity for sort of big developers as well to sort of break into that sector. It's got to be a low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what needs to happen next is big developers need to realize there is a market in the affordable market that can be profitable and that they can participate. And we need to be innovative. So we really need to move away from this preconceived idea that every apartment has to be, for example, 40 or 50 or 60 square meters in size. Now, our office are producing some fantastic apartments, much smaller, much more innovative, very clever ideas. We're using a concept called volumetric design, where it's more about the volume than just the square meterage, how we can use different heights in apartments to create different sleeping areas and that sort of thing. So I think there's a really exciting opportunity for innovative design and innovative style of apartments, which can be much smaller, much more affordable. And I think, Erwin talks about a lot of old housing stock in inner cities, but I think you're going to start seeing new housing stock coming into the inner cities. Baldwin's already made that announcement in Sandton. We're about to announce a new affordable housing scheme of 800 apartments alongside Melrose Arch in Johannesburg. We've already committed to 200 affordable apartments in our Harbour Arch project. There'll be small apartments. They'll be aimed specifically at people who work in our scheme. So there'll be no commuting. They'll be able to work and live in the same precinct. So I'm quite optimistic and excited about the affordable housing market, but we need to be innovative.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to bring in Erwin here because it's a question a little bit off the mark of affordable, but it's directed to you based on your presentation this morning. How do you think the house price decline will affect the 4 million to 7 million market in the Western Cape, specifically in the context of people moving here from other parts of the country? What are your thoughts around that, Erwin?
Well, it's a very, very thin market. Quite frankly, I wouldn't even consider it as an investment. That is typically owner-occupied, I would argue. If you do the analysis that Alison was doing, you'll find that that market is so small that it's virtually negligible. So, and it is a high risk market. I've got a brother who stays on the Atlantic seacoast, and I'm telling you, if you walk down his street, it's amazing how many of these manors are standing empty. So it's highly exposed to the politics and to the state of the economy. So I wouldn't consider it as an investment. Sorry, that's my view.
Yeah, well, the numbers didn't come up very well, both in, I think, Alison's numbers, also Siplamanda's numbers, although Siphamandla saw a drop-off in the immigration in that sector.
Yeah, but that is, that's a temporary thing. It's you can't really immigrate when the rest of the world is standing still. Nothing is happening. Sure. So you must have a job before you can immigrate, unless you are, of course, retired. The other important point I would like to make about these very high priced manors is that from an investment point of view, if you were to rent it out, your income yield is not 7% or 8%. Or 10% as in the case, or 11% as in the case of city centre converted blocks. Your initial yield is probably in the region of 1% or 2%, so you're then completely and utterly dependent on capital growth. And as I pointed out before, the capital growth is highly volatile. It all depends. When you have an economy that's booming, yes, you'll do very well, because then the rich also do well. They do better than the average. But the reverse also applies. So it's like having a geared investment in a sense.
Okay, there's another trend that's happened. I'm going to put it forward to all everybody in the panel, because I'm not quite sure who's qualified, but you're all welcome to make a contribution. There's been quite a shift of people moving to smaller towns. We call them the subsectors, Hermanus, George, Neisner. We've seen, and I've got good reports from estate agents that in that sort of mid-sector, let's say up to 2-3 million market, there's been quite, a lot of activity in terms of transactional activity in those areas. And one reason is obviously affordable, moving away from the cities and that kind of stuff. Does that mean that there could be better value in there? So the question is it seems like good value for money, given that we have a bit of a price. And I'm going to put it over to anybody in the panel. Who would like to have a go? You just stick your hand. James, you want to maybe have a crack at that one? So you're just on mute there, James? Okay, there we go.
I think I'm up now. Yeah, I'm going to take it in the context of our international business, if I may. So we're seeing in the UK, for example, a real lifestyle choice from residents where they're wanting to move out of the city of London and they want to buy bigger homes outside of the city. And, this coronavirus has really made people very aware of open space and bigger homes and being closer to kids' schools and that sort of thing. So, we're seeing a real trend, and one of the reasons why we invested in a new scheme outside Norwich, doing 156 houses there, residential houses, because there is this trend, and I can see the same trend happening in South Africa, where people are seeing more lifestyle opportunities in smaller towns, bigger homes, more ground, more relaxed lifestyle. So I think one of these things that this coronavirus has done, perhaps on a more longer term basis, is made people really think a little bit more about their lifestyles and where they want to live and how big their gardens are going to be. So that's definitely something we've seen internationally, and I think we're going to see more of it in South Africa too. And lifestyle estates, our lifestyle estates in South Africa have done extremely well. The likes of Val de Vie and Sitari are very strong. Again, people realizing that, if we go down to another lockdown, the ability to be able to walk around a secure estate or ride your mountain bike inside a security estate or jog or whatever the case may be, much better than perhaps living on a street or in a block of flats. So I can definitely see that trend continuing.
Okay, great. Siphamandla, I'm going to give it to you, and then I'm going to ask Erwin for you to comment, because you would certainly see if there's finance activity in that sector.
Yes, no, definitely. I agree with James. We are seeing these trends globally, the UK and the US as well. And we have started seeing it in South Africa, particularly demand being diverted from the major CBDs, your Sandtons of this world, towards George, Platinum Bay, I think is one of them, Bloemfontein. So these second-tier cities, we are seeing a lot of movement. So from a value perspective, you still find value in those cities. I think the important question will be, will that value be preserved going forward? So if you just take a very simple comparison, if you take price per square meter, for example, a very similar house with similar characteristics in George versus in Sandton, you'll find that you pay slightly less in George than in Sandton. From a value perspective, yes, there's value there. Now, it will then depend going forward whether that movement of demand towards those cities attracts more investment. So investment into infrastructure, roads, schools, shopping centers, and the like. So if there is going to be appetite from investors, to invest into infrastructure in those areas, we then should see that value being preserved over a longer period of time. We haven't started seeing that. I mean, it's early days, but if you look at the type or the kind or the buyer power of those who are moving to those cities, it's mainly the older generation. They will a lot of buying power, so it's likely that their movement towards those towns will then attract more investment, and that's where you keep. And that's why you preserve property value.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Siphamandla. Erwin, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to use the example of Los Angeles and San Francisco especially. Prices there have become so high that working people are forced to decentralize, if you like. They've got to move out to areas that are cheaper. And of course, that is made more easy by the by IT and the internet and so forth and so on. As for moving to places like George, I would submit that that's probably more your, as Sipa has said, maybe your older people who have retired or are planning to retire. Although in the past there has been people who moved to, say, a place like Greyton and started a business from there. It can be done. But I would also like to point out that the old rule of thumb for the success of Garf estates, and that would include places like Val de Vie, is that you shouldn't move out more than, say, 40 kilometers from the metropolitan area's center. Success is based on not being too far out on a limb, too far out from the metropole. For instance, don't go to Worcester, but Val de Vie, yes, that is still doable. Yes, if you really want to go out to the Sutherlands of this world, that can be done nowadays, presumably with internet. But then, of course, it's not an investment decision; it's a lifestyle decision. So we must differentiate here between making an investment and going for a cheaper lifestyle on a platteland.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think, Erwin, there's been quite a response there. I've got a few comments that I just want to add in terms of this moving or semigrating. Nice and Plet is pumping. Person who owns Sotheby's in Plet has had the best 3 months ever in 20 years. Corolla says, so agree, the country trend. I live in a small Overberg town and properties have been on the market for a few years or selling very quickly. So we're certainly seeing demand. One agency here alone has seen 7 sales in just 2 months, which is a lot for a town that size. You know, so there's definitely, there seems to be a move for quality of life and sort of a shift there and a change in lifestyle. Maybe people are looking at getting faster internet and working from the home office, but in sort of a more sort of a nicer kind of environment. Okay, I want to move back to the question before we are running out of time. So I've got 1 or 2 questions that I want to run through first. And then I've got 2 more I'm going to run through, and then I'm going to ask everybody to do a little wrap up, a little 4-minute, 5-minute wrap up from each of you, sort of giving us a way forward. But Alison, I'm going to bring you here in again. We're going to go back to the affordable discussion. And it's from Daniel, and he said, I met somebody who didn't qualify for an RDP property from government because he earned just small amount above the maximum amount allowed to qualify. But he cannot afford to buy another property in the area, which means he needs to stay in a shack. And is there anything being done for the people falling in that income gap? Yeah, well, you know, roll on the government, roll on Bitprop, roll on. Yes, do you want to maybe make a comment on that, Alison? And maybe Claire, you want to also comment on that too.
There's a government program that I think is not well known enough called the FLISP, the Financial Linked Individual Subsidy Program. And that provides a subsidy to people earning between $3,500 and $22,000 a month. So it's designed to cover that target market exactly above those who earn less than $3,500 and therefore don't qualify for an RDP house. And the way the FLISP works, for those who aren't familiar, is it's a sliding scale. So the lower your income, the higher the subsidy. And it is dependent on your income and not on the cost of the house. Okay, so it's not a percentage of the house, it's related to your income. If you have the lowest income, the 3,500 bracket, then you can access close to 122,000 Rand as a subsidy. And at the highest end, you can access about 28,000 Rand as a subsidy. And what happens is that there's eligibility criteria that have to do with being a South African resident, a citizen, or a permanent resident. You can't have benefited from government housing programs previously. You need to have dependents. Let's see, you can't have previously owned property, and there's a couple other requirements as well as income. And the way the FLISP works is that you can either apply through the developer of a housing project, So there may be a government housing project that is mixed income, so it has some RDP and some FLISP units, and you apply through the developer to access the FLISP subsidy. Alternatively, you can use the FLISP subsidy on the resale market, so it doesn't need to be a new unit. You can find a property in your area and go to the bank and be approved for a mortgage. That is a requirement of receiving the FLISP. And then you can use that amount either as your down payment, so that you can apply for a property that's a higher price than what you previously would have been able to afford, or you can apply for the same price house that you would have had previously, but you're using that subsidy in order to have your monthly payments be lower. So it's a great program. Unfortunately, it has not had the take-up that we'd like to see, and I think that's partly because of awareness, partly because of obstacles in the administrative systems, delays in payment, and the institutional mechanisms behind it are not sufficiently effective.
Okay,
but it is available to those in that market that the person was asking the question about.
Excellent. Did you want to add to that, Claire?
No, I mean, the FLISP is definitely kind of the space to be playing, but then also in terms of what we're seeing a lot of, it's people who are actually asking us advice on what type of property to buy so that they can qualify for backyard rentals with us, because we have a very specific model and a very specific size. And so that's also like an interesting kind of thing to look at, because instead of just applying for or getting an RDP house now, if you have the option to buy, you can also look in terms of how you can invest further into your property so it starts to make a passive income for you over time.
Excellent, great. I'm going to take one more question, then we're going to move to a wrap up from each one of the panelists. And I think it's been a fantastic discussion, and I think we've really opened up a whole lot of thought processes on affordable, movement of people. And I'm going to pivot a little bit to you, Siphamandla, and it's a question which is on the distressed property market, because nobody talks about, we've got 30% unemployment. We've got to realize we're still under a bit of duress. Not everybody's as optimistic as Erwin, but so we need to talk about what are the bank's views at the moment regarding repossessions and taking legal action on property owners in arrears on their bonds. And when would this pressure on the market start to show? And I think that's quite a valid point, because I would assume, and I've kind of got a feeling, and it's from empirical evidence from people that are struggling in certain areas because they lost jobs, etc., but they can't service their bonds. What are the bank's policies there, Siphamandla?
Right. Look, I think one of the key differences between the crisis we are in now versus the 2008 crisis is particularly that how financial institutions have approached it. Right, in 2008, for example, there wasn't any of this payment holiday. There wasn't any employment of scorecards, for example. So the quality of a buyer now versus in 2008 vastly different, because of the processes behind the granting of the loans in the first place, and how the financial institutions approached this particular crisis. And I think it also comes with the realization that repossessions are a lose-lose situation. No one really wins out of repossessions, and as a result of that, you started seeing banks coming up with alternative ways or more innovation in terms of how to relieve that pressure on consumers. For FNB, for example, you've got Quick Sell, which allows a seller to get a good price out of their property before we can get into that stage of repossession. So in short, yes, we are worried. We are worried, particularly because of this uncertain outlook, particularly on the labor market. But the approach this time around, I think it realizes that it's a delicate situation. It's going to affect all of us, and I think there's that pragmatic approach. We have started seeing an increase in volume of quick sell, but it shouldn't be viewed in negative light altogether, because it has allowed those homeowners who, in a different regime, would have had, to sell their properties under very different circumstances. But that innovation, that quick sell innovation, has allowed them to get value out of their property, and of course, giving them an opportunity to get out of the financial pressure that they are in. So yes, we are worried, but we are taking a pragmatic approach. I think you're on mute, Neale.
Thank you, Siphamandla. My fingers slipped on that one. Thank you, wonderful. So, I mean, if I go mute, then there's a problem, isn't there? But okay, it's great. So I think, look, so there's also opportunities out there. So there's somebody says, in which price brackets do you predict the most distressed properties? Well, I think it's definitely in the higher end, I would assume, but we've also seen in the bottom end as well. But just a quick answer on that one, Siphamandla.
Yes, definitely the higher end, 3 million and upwards, I would say. In the bottom end, yes, we have seen pressure as well, but it hasn't translated much into price. Yes, activity, yes, sales due to financial pressure, but we haven't seen a beating in terms of price, a significant beating in terms of price. But as soon as you get into like 3 million and above, that's where you start seeing visible pressure.
Okay, excellent. Great stuff. I think, well, that's all the questions that we can take for now. So what I'm going to do is going to go around to the panel, ask each of you to give 3 or 4 minutes to wrap up your final thoughts, maybe leave somebody for the prospects of the South African market going forward. Pessimism, optimism, your thoughts, what could happen, where is the future? Give somebody a little bit of hope, a little bit of thoughts. I'm going to start off with you, Erwin, if you don't mind. If you could give us your 3 to 4 minute wrap up, and then
I'm going to wrap it up by I'm going to wrap it up by saying something which we haven't discussed today, and this is that it seems that at long last the government is now realizing that it can't afford from a finance point of view to keep on supporting giveaway houses. The RDP houses. The Minister of Human Settlements announced 2 days ago that it hasn't gone to the cabinet, but it seems it's going to happen. That from now on, the government will only provide, hopefully, serviced land, but only land only. And then, so we're going to the service, the site and service option then. It's got just huge implications, of course, but if we do it proactively, the government, and that's the important thing, it should be done proactively. We shouldn't wait for invasions. We should proactively provide site and services.
Okay, I think it's a nice way to wrap up, Erwin. It's a wonderful way. Alison, your final thoughts, way forward for everybody. You gave a wonderful presentation this morning. Give us your parting shots.
I think in terms of the government's approach, that is absolutely the direction that we're moving in. I find that article in Business Day quite funny because it's been a policy approach that's been there for about 5 years, if not longer. Yeah. And it's been coming out for a long, long time. I think it hasn't been said very stridently, and perhaps it's not been said clear enough that people are understanding it. But it's certainly been the understanding and realization of the political leadership for a long time that we cannot afford to give houses away for free, and that we have to shift towards service sites, and that the giveaway house has to be limited to indigent and military veterans, those who really cannot help themselves. So perhaps it's encouraging to see that it's coming to the surface more and it's being heard. But that's what we've been trying to move towards for a long time. There are challenges to moving towards that, starting with measurement, I think, and around looking at spatial transformation. But I guess 2 thoughts in terms of closing ideas. One of them is, as we move towards service sites, building improvement loans and microfinance are going to become all the more important. As people build incrementally. And the work that CAF has been doing around Africa tells us very clearly that the vast majority of Africans, and South Africans are not excluded, build their houses incrementally. And you're going to see that more and more as government shifts towards site and service. So we go ahead and put up the frame, we add a room, we add a porch, we add another room. And we need to think about how the financial system can support that. And BitProp is onto something. And other NGOs that are working in this space have started to figure out these models that work for that. And we need to scale those up and support them institutionally. I think that's incredibly important. The second point I think is related to that is around backyard rental, which is a massive area of opportunity, both in more low-income township markets as well as formal markets and formal areas. And those can be supported through finance as well. A lot of micro developers in township markets don't like using finance. They will save up or use a windfall payment, a pension or something else to build their units. So I think it's really important that financial institutions start listening more to micro builders about how to design a product that's appropriate and that would have a profit margin and would work in that context and that market. So I think those were probably the two main ideas. The third one would just be the point that I made earlier in the presentation, which is the importance of the resale market at the lower end. And I think the key way that we can support that market and support its effective functioning is to look at the processes behind a transaction and a formal transaction. And that's going to require a partnership between the financial institutions and the municipality to get all of that paperwork done quickly and smoothly so it doesn't become the obstacle. For goodness sake, I mean, if the money is not the problem, then how we actually do rates clearance certificates and sort out title deeds should really not be what's holding us up in this system. Thanks.
Right, did you hear that, Siphamandla? Finance mustn't be the problem.
Sorry, I should say that F&B has been fantastic. We work closely with F&B, and they've got great down market product. And they have a dedicated staff to think about that and to work on it and to be thought leaders around it. I should have said that earlier.
Should have opened with that, Alison.
Alison, thank you very much for your contribution today. It's been great. Wonderful, wonderful presentation, great insights, great discussion. Siphamandla, you want to give us your closing parting shots?
Right. I feel like we've depressed people quite a lot, so I'm just going to keep it short and straight to the point. Look, but facts are facts, right? Look, so from where we stand, we are of course encouraged by the kind of activity that we are seeing. Certainly, the impact of the pandemic hasn't been as bad as initially feared, so that's a positive. But looking ahead, there are a couple of risk factors that we need to keep in mind. One of which is this labor market headwinds. We don't think we are out of the woods yet. Particularly, we think that the composition of job losses might shift towards that pressure on labor market might extend to your typical white-collar professions. And in turn, that has an impact of knocking confidence. And of course, once that happens, you will start seeing dampening effect on activity and of course on price. The second thing that we are also worried about is with rising unemployment, it means that demand is shrinking. So the size of the pie is shrinking, and we've seen this through rising rental vacancies and subdued rental inflation. Now, the question for us as home sellers or those who are on the other side of the market is, how long will landlords hold on to their properties? Wouldn't there be a time when, particularly if you consider how rates and taxes have risen over the past couple of years, now combining that with shrinking demand and pressure on rental inflation, how long will landlords hold on to their stock? At some point, it's possible that they dump that stock into the market. Of course, the consequence of that is that rising supply at a time when there is insufficient demand, and of course, that's going to push prices down. The third one is if that immigration trend resumes. My colleague Erwin did touch on this, that it might just have been just a pause. If it resumes, of course, it's going to be slightly more difficult now compared to 2019 because everyone is affected by the pandemic. Unemployment has risen everywhere else in the world, so it will be slightly more difficult. Maybe even if it resumes, it won't go to the levels that we saw in 2019, but certainly there's nothing stopping it, stopping that trend from resuming in 2021 and 2022. So if that happens, it could potentially put more pressure on the higher end of the market, and again pushes prices down. And combine that with the wealth effects that I spoke about, pressure on income, on rental income, on dividends, on interest, that serves as an additional pressure. But with all of that, there are supporting factors. The low interest rate environment. We think that we will be in that environment for quite some time. It will take us time before we get back to the levels we were in January. And of course, the efforts to reignite economic activity. If that boosts sentiment and employment, we think that it will be supportive of the market. But all in all, we think that in the medium term, prices are going to face, are going to take a bit of a hit. But we expect that there will be an improvement, there will be a recovery in 2022 and onwards, as the rest of the economy improves.
Excellent. Siphamandla, thank you very much. As normal, you always give such a wonderful insight into the market. Thank you for your contribution today. James, if you could give us your wrap up, your parting thoughts, and I'm sure you'll leave somebody, well, all of us, with some great inspiration.
Yeah, look, we need to be a little bit positive. There's some good things happening in South Africa. It's not all negative. On the political front, we're seeing some serious activity by government in trying to right some of the wrongs of the past. In the affordable housing arena, I think we're going to see a lot of innovation. Everything we've spoken about today on prices and all the negativity, it's really about the formal market and what's already existing. But I think we're seeing some real changes, some real new innovations. I think you're going to see a lot more micro apartments, backyard dwellings, a whole new asset class of affordable housing coming through. I love the fact that we're moving away from RDP housing and we're making people responsible for their own development. We're a very entrepreneurial society throughout all our citizens. So I'm excited about the prospect that we're going to make service land available, allow people to build incrementally, backyard dwellings, micro apartments, innovative ways to finance. I'm optimistic about this country. Don't emigrate, stay here, work together. Let's improve the country together. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, James. It's a great way to end, and thank you for your contribution today. And last but not least, Claire, you got the last word. I mean, you're very powerful. You don't realize by ending off, you're in charge. Over to you, Claire.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, as all the other panelists have said, I'm incredibly optimistic about South Africa and about South Africa's property market, not just our township markets, but also sort of all the way through. I think what's exciting for me is as more pressure gets put on government at this lower end of the market to really evaluate the zoning regulations and the building sort of regulations to allow for this type of development, I'm hoping to see that will rise from the bottom upward as well. And so that we'll see, sort of like lower middle income neighborhoods also starting to maybe not put as many, but to start to develop more rental accommodation on bigger pieces of land closer to the city or amenities. And I think what Alison touched on in terms of this idea of service sites, but also backyarding, is we have to be so incredibly careful that this happens. This type of residential housing development in this market happens hand in hand with other investments into these areas. So for me, what I would really like to see is government actually kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, you know what, we've done housing for 26 years. We're done now. Let's focus on the public realm and really start to invest in public spaces, in roads and services, upgrading bulk infrastructure, so that private investors see sort of the future of townships as whole spaces rather than just dormitory townships, and move in with better amenities, so that we're not just densifying these dormitory spaces in our cities, but we're rather starting to sort of bring them up to speed with other more previously affluent neighborhoods. And so that's my sort of real hope, is that that people won't be so risk averse when looking at township markets in the years to come.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of our final episode, part 3 of the 2020 Real Estate Investor Rode Virtual Property Conference. And I would like to thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution today. Erwin Rode, the founder and director of Rode & Associates. Alison Tshangana, head of research and market intelligence for Center for Affordable Housing Finance. Siphamandla Mkhwanazi, our senior economist of FNB. James Wilson, co-founder and CEO of the Amdec Group, and of course, last but not least, director and head architect of Bitprop, Claire de Trevou. Thank you all for your wonderful contribution. We are planning on bringing this event to you in both the virtual and live formats in 2021. So we'll be expanding not only to the major metros, such as Johannesburg, Pretoria, but we want to deliver it to areas like Port Elizabeth, Bloemfontein, George. So, Erwin, we will be going to George and Mpumalanga. And there'll be an option to either attend a virtual or a live event. So we're moving in the direction of hybrid events. So please watch out for our announcements shortly for both the Real Estate Investor and Rode Associates virtual conferences later, either this year or early in the new year. To the audience, thank you for being so patient. Thank you for joining us on this 3-part marathon session. And also for your inputs and participation with all the questions. We hope you enjoyed it and got value from today. And we thank you all, including our panelists. Any unanswered questions, they will be published in the Real Estate Investor Digimag. Ask the experts on the REMAG website. And if you have any new questions you'd like answered, then post it at info@reimag.co.za. A reminder for those attendees that logged on late or had to leave early or missed parts of the live version of the conference, we will personally email you a special link of the recording. So not to worry, if you missed out key elements, you will be able to get a link to that. We have one more webinar. There's one last webinar for 2020. If you are a property broker or estate agent or interested in prop tech that can propel your business operations, it's a free webinar. Then you can join us. It's on Wednesday, the 25th. It's for our REI virtual masterclass, free of charge. For those of you who'd like to book, just click on the link below or go to events on the REI Mag website and make your booking there. So I'd like to end off with an inspirational quote from Nelson Mandela, and he made a profound statement, and he made many. And he said, overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. And like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural.